And we're back for our final story of the day for term 5, and we're returning to chapter 62, Salute a Hero. Grandpa's funeral was a week later. The local church was packed out with those wanting to pay their final respects to this hero. Jack was sitting in the front row in a pew between his mother and father. The boy knew the coffin he was staring at was empty. Mysteriously, the Spitfire had never been found. Neither had Grandpa's body. The Harrier jump jet pilots reported seeing the old plane fly higher and higher into the Earth's atmosphere before disappearing from their radar screens. There were days and nights of searches, but all without a trace of the Spitfire turning up anywhere. A Union flag was draped over the coffin. It was the British way to honour those in the military. Sat on the coffin was Grandpa's most illustrious medal, the Distinguished Flying Cross. Directly behind Jack sat Raj, who was crying and blowing his nose loudly like he was playing the tuba. Along from him sat all the elderly people that Grandpa and Jack had rescued from Twilight Towers, including Mrs. Trifle, the Major and the Rear Admiral. All were forever grateful to the man that had helped them escape, Grandpa. What happened at Twilight Towers had become something of a national scandal. It had made the front page of the newspapers and the television news. Jack didn't want to take any credit, but Grandpa had become famous. The old folks' home may have burned to the ground, but the nurses were still at large. What's more, no one knew what fate had befallen the mastermind of it all, Twilight Towers' wicked matron. Had Miss Swine perished in the fire? Or was she busy hatching her next evil plan? On the other side of the aisle, a squadron of old World War II pilots were seated. These elderly comrades of Wing Commander Bunting sat proudly with their backs perfectly straight. All of them had some kind of military moustache, be it the pencil, handlebar, mutton chop, horseshoe, imperial, dandy, swashbuckler, walrus, Mexican, lampshade, toothbrush, French style, batwing, Fu Manchu, or the Salvador Dali. Have a look at all those moustaches. All wore blazers and slacks, with rows upon rows of medals clinking together on their chests. All the children from Jack's history class were there too. They had petitioned their teacher, Miss Verity, to have some time off lessons to pay their respects. They had loved Grandpa's visit and would never forget his thrilling stories of the Battle of Britain. Of course, children wanted to support their classmate Jack too. On learning what a true hero the old man was, Miss Verity felt mightily guilty at how she had treated him in the history class that day. Now she was shedding a tear for him as well. Putting a comforting arm around her was a security guard from the Imperial War Museum. Romance had clearly blossomed between the pair since she gave him the kiss of life. Behind them, on the back pew, were Beef and Bone, the two hapless detectives from Scotland Yard. They had got to know Jack and his parents well, and now they were heading up the police investigation into Twilight Towers. Having seen their interrogation technique, Jack did not hold out much hope. However, the boy knew they meant well, and even in his deep sadness, he was pleased they could attend Grandpa's funeral too. After some music from the church organ, Reverend Hogg began the sermon. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to mourn the passing of a grandfather, father and friend to many. He was the only man I ever truly loved, announced Mrs. Trifle, suddenly with a huge sense of melodrama. But the boy stared at the vicar. He stopped listening to what he was saying. Jack had begun to notice that there was something very suspicious about the man. As the boy stared, he spotted that the vicar was wearing thick patches of makeup on his face, as if to cover something up. What's more, Reverend Hogg kept stealing nervous glances at Jack from behind his glasses as he spoke. His diamond-encrusted gold watch jangled on his wrist, and when he saw the boy staring at it, he pulled his sleeve down awkwardly to hide it. Reverend Hogg's shiny black shoes looked like they were made from some hugely expensive alligator skin. Oozing from him was the sickly sweet aroma of champagne and expensive cigars. This was no ordinary vicar who helped others. This was someone who helped himself. Now turn to page 124 in your hymn books. I vow to thee, my country. Reverend Hogg nodded at the organist, a big burly man with love-hate tattooed on his knuckles. In a sudden flash, Jack realised he was a dead ringer for Nurse Rose. As the music began, all the mourners rose to their feet and began to sing, I vow to thee, my country, all earthly things above, entire and whole and perfect, the service of my love. During the hymn, Jack gazed at the vicar's eyes. They were small and piggy. He'd seen those eyes somewhere before. I heard my country calling, away across the sea, across the waste of waters, she calls and calls to me. As the hymn continued, the boy took into the choir. Scars down their faces, broken noses, teeth missing. Not one of them knew a single word of the hymn they mumbled their way through in low, growly voices. Could the one in the middle with the gold tooth be Nurse Daisy? I hear the noise of battle, the thunder of her guns. I haste to thee, my mother, a son among thy sons. Jack looked over his shoulder to see the vicar's helper, a verger, standing at the back. As was traditional, he wore a long black gown, but more unusually, he had a skin head and a tattoo of a spider's web across his neck. Again, this looked very familiar. Was this Nurse Blossom? And there's another country I've heard of long ago, most dear to them that love her, most great to them that know. As the hymn drew to an end, Jack was sure he was close to solving the mystery. Memories flashed through his mind. Miss Swine smoking that big fat cigar. The vicar's zeal is recommending Twilight Towers. That little upturned nose they shared. And if all these church helpers, the organist, the choir and the verger were Twilight Tower's fake nurses, the criminal gang intent on stealing the life savings of elderly people that were meant to be looking after, then surely their leader could not be far away. Continuing with the service, Reverend Hogg announced, I am now going to read Psalm 33, sing joyfully to the Lord. Well, Jack couldn't contain himself any longer and rose to his feet. Stop the funeral! He bellowed. Chapter 64. Pants on Fire. Stopping a funeral midway through was unheard of. None of the people gathered in the church could believe the boy had done it. Suddenly, all eyes in the room were on Jack, except one or two wandering glass eyes that belonged to the elderly airmen. What is the meaning of this? Thundered Reverend Hogg. What on earth are you doing, son? Whispered Dad. Please, Jack, sit down and be quiet, hissed Mum, pulling the boy by the arm to sit back down on the pew. The vicar, began the boy. He was trembling slightly, and as much as he tried to, he couldn't quite keep his finger from wobbling. The vicar and the matron, they're the same person! 400 people gasped in shock, except the Rear Admiral, who was more than a little deaf, and as his hearing aid whistled loudly, he called out, What did you say, boy? I said, began Jack again, now becoming much louder, the vicar and the matron are the same person. He's a crook. Sorry, someone was whistling in my ear. I didn't hear a single word. His friend, the Major, was sat right next to him and shouted, He said the vicar is a crook. A cook, said the Rear Admiral. does he cook? Oh, I'll explain later, bellowed the Major. No, that vile little child is lying, protested the vicar now. Sweat beaded on his forehead. His mouth was so dry it had started making clicking sounds when he tried to speak. The man was unravelling like a ball of string. Meanwhile, the choir looked at each other, nervously. They had been rumbled. He made us do it, cried Nurse Daisy, suddenly. Pretend to be nurses at an old person's home? Silence, snapped the vicar. I'll confess everything. I am too pretty for prison. I said silence! One of the rats was already leaving the sinking ship. More was sure to follow. The boy felt he was on a roll now. So, Miss Swine did survive the fire at Twilight Towers after all. You've been hiding in plain sight all this time. I've done nothing wrong, protested Reverend Hogg. I only changed their wills so I could give all the money to the poor. Liar, liar, shouted the boy. Pants on fire, continued Raj. You spent what you stole on champagne and cigars and a brand new sports car, exclaimed Jack. Reverend Hogg had been well and truly busted. And after half term, we pick up at chapter 65, which is entitled An Army of Oldies.